Museum of Graffiti's Daily Artist Talk. I'm happy you could join us.
Yeah, brother.
I got a lot to cover. For those that don't know you, I'm going to give a little background, and then we're going to go and survey some of your work. I'm really excited to go through it with you. So I'm going to flip the screen around so people can see your tag.
Let's get into it.
Okay. So EWOK started writing in around 90, 91, and his first pieces were in abandoned locations and train tunnels in Kingston, New York. And he continued upstate in a vacuum until 96, when he came later to Pratt University in 96 through 2000, specializing in traditional finger roll animation. I have to note that finger roll animation is not computer animation. And this has helped him develop in his character work and help him fall in love with figure study drawing, and pay attention to mood, gesture, and the importance of line weight. You've spent a long time focusing on style writing as well, and the technical aspects of style writing. And through the 90s, you were a force to be reckoned with. And you've had your first art show in 2001. And have you been traveling and doing art shows for about 20 years now, and continuing to build that identity, both as a graffiti writer and fine art painter. And so one of the things that I want people to wrap their head around you, like, who is EWOK, right? Because you are quite special in terms of your skills as a style writer, but also, as was mentioned, you know, your history in animation and character development. So we're going to go to the beginning, EWOK, and why don't you walk us through how you got into graffiti, being a northern New Yorker. How did graffiti reach up north towards Kingston?
So for me, the very first time I saw graffiti was a Subway art book, and that was the seed that planted it all. And then a couple of years later, it became like skateboarding and graphics and seeing tags around the skate spots in my area and just picking up on like the same names appearing in different locations. But mainly the biggest plug for me was the Subway art book in junior high school. So, you know, upstate, it was in the school library. I was ripping pages out and taking the pages home because we couldn't take the book home. So those pages were pivotal, man. Super, super important for me. I've told this story so many times to like friends of mine and stuff, but yeah, those pages were really important to me.
Did anybody in particular stand out to you when you were coming up?
Yeah. I was telling my girl about this because I had to pull the book open to like express like certain pictures and certain images. And it was like the nude blonde chick that I think Airborne did. It was like the Baudet-ish female character with the blonde hair and the big tits. And it was like, and it was right next to like people getting on the train, and it was the size and the scale and just like the stock cap, one line, done, no cleanup, but that was like the way it was, you know. And there was the too many outline in the book, and I mean, there's just so much Gandhi stuff, and it was just a lot of impactful stuff. But I remember trying to take letters out of the book and try and form my alphabet, and then make words and try and redraw those letters from different people and make words, which didn't make any sense at the time, but I didn't have any reference other than those photos. So I was trying to like Frankenstein names and try and like do people's names in class and stuff like that. But that book was like the very first impact of like what was happening, and just like the kid running across the top of the train and photos of like the city life and stuff at that time was just so impactful to me.
So being that you were from upstate rural, what kept you from coming into the city? Were you too young, or were you afraid?
I mean, I was coming to the city as a skater with like a pack of kids on the Trailway bus. We'd go downtown and skate the Wall Street area and like the Brooklyn Banks and stuff like that as like a pack of kids. But I wasn't seeing any real graffiti in those areas other than like tags and like the brick on the bricks of the Brooklyn Banks and stuff like that. But the first time I was seeing like full like style and like pieces was kind of like skateboard graphics and like design in the skateboard industry and stuff like that at the time, like Shut. And these were like the first times I was seeing like caricatures and stuff like that. And then a couple of years later, it was like the Source magazine Chino's page had like the monthly thing that I was like, I would go to the magazine store and get that one issue just for that one page, which was really important for me too. I mean, these are just early things. I've spoken to a lot of people about this stuff. A lot of the guys who are tuned in now, they know like the things that brought me up for sure. But up there, I think we were fortunate in a weird way because we were in a vacuum, so we weren't really inspired, not really like affected by stuff going on at the same time. We were able to kind of figure things out in a vacuum. That when I finally came to the city in like '96, I think my first piece was at the Freedom Tunnels in like '94, '95. And that was my first time painting in the city. But when I really got my feet wet was around '96 in the city. We just had a different outlook and a different approach. And a lot of it was kind of like talked down to, and we didn't really get a lot of love. So it's really weird, the stuff I've been posting lately from that era, everybody loves now. But at the time, we got like no love. It was
So
just
when you say we, who was we? Who was your
I had a
crew?
bunch of partners at the time, and we kind of all felt like outcasts. So we kind of leaned on each other to try to inspire each other. And we all kind of had
Who were some of these writers from that period?
at the time, it was my partner at the time was this guy Ultra from upstate. I think he was from like Newburgh area, something around Newburgh. This kid Demon that we met from DC who came to Pratt in '96 at the same time, and my boy Jedi, and just people from that era that were all sort of on the same page, but they weren't really maybe as inspired to keep up. So a lot of those guys kind of fell off or maybe went in different directions. But they were all important to me at the time because we all kind of we all inspired each other at the time. And it kind of like, it was a puzzle piece that definitely led to where I'm at now. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And one of the things is that you don't have subways upstate, but you do have the rails.
Freights.
The
freights, like, that was the only way because we felt like nobody was hearing us. So like the only way I could get stuff out was to hit trains. And even back then, like, nobody took pictures. I didn't know anything. Like, we hit them at night. I would use opposite colors, like a light fill and a dark outline, and then they would be gone. And, like, I mean, we painted so many freights that I never heard or anybody, like, after that. They were just gone. But that was the only way I thought that they would get out of that area was just hitting freights in Poughkeepsie. They would go either north, I think, up to Albany or down south to who knows where.
It seems to me that early on, you were really focused on the development of style and lettering style, and very complicated lettering style. You kind of seem to move from the basic New York style into something rather more individualistic, would you say?
Yeah, I think I was trying to bite off as much as I could in like a night with like lights and darks, and I was fortunate to not be, for a couple of years I wasn't really distracting myself with color. I was trying to use like a solid one color fill and then an outline, and trying to do as much as I could with the letter form. And my goal was to spend a few years just doing letters and then later do color, because I remember there was something in a videograph where they were like, I think Frame was talking about how New Yorkers were approaching those guys like they were hiding everything with color. And I think that kind of stuck out to me. Like, I was like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to work on my letters first. So like those guys that I look up to can look at my letters and appreciate my letters. Like, I always felt like I had to sort of prove myself to the people before me. And I spent a bunch of years like not really looking at letters until later on. And then applying lettering and color at the same time was like a different wave for me. You know what I mean? So there's a whole era where my stuff got real colorful. But before that, it was like this, like the simple outline color and then like a fill color. Very
So
bold.
during this period, were you already kind of figuring out what type of artist you were going to be developing into? Because there was the lettering, but there was also your illustration skills that were starting to take shape as you painted your productions.
I mean, it's weird because first I wanted to do lettering, but I always loved the idea of characters. So like I looked at guys like Mode 2 and Hex and you know, just the panel pieces with characters next to it. Like, I always wanted to have a piece, but like bookends, like two dope characters on the sides. And like, I figured if no one else can do that, then I can do that for my pieces. So it was always I always liked to draw, and I was into cartoons and stuff, but the character stuff, it was always just a little tweaked and warped. Like, I was more into like a weirder sense of humor and like a little bit of something off. I liked when things were a little off. I was gravitated towards that like weird skewed view of things. And I tried to, over the years, find a balance because not everybody's into that stuff, and I kind of figured that stuff out later on too. But I feel like the people that are on my wavelength or my frequency, they appreciate it for that because it's not the norm. It's a little off. So that was kind of like the character approach because, you know, character people are a dime a dozen. I had to find a niche that was a little different. You know what I mean?
Right. And again, and to find that niche, also to complement it was how sophisticated your lettering style was getting into. Not just your lettering style. I got to make a note of this, is that also your paint control, the way you started composing some of these productions is really fantastic. And they're very sculptural. This particular piece, this EWOK piece, it's coming right off the wall. It's a fantastic piece. It's simple in its color, but you really threw the monkey wrench, everything into it with regards to style.
Thank you. Those pieces, the ones that are like, for the most part, two colors, is always like revisiting that early phase of me trying to not hide behind anything, like as naked as I can be, you know, appreciate the flaws and the weaknesses, but also appreciate the strengths. Like I'm not going to sit here and say it's the strongest letters, but I would always show it for what it is and judge it for what it is and call out the flaws if you want. But there's a lot of people that are afraid to do that, and I feel like I've seen so many people hide their flaws, but not really celebrate their flaws and celebrate their strengths. So I always felt like this, of all things, this style was always something that would stand alone. And I still to this day, like I like to go back to that and like abandon all color and just look at the skeleton and the framework of things, you know?
What does it teach you? What is taking away the color teach you about style writing?
It just shows how it stands up. You know what I mean? Like a sketch, like a black and white ballpoint pen on paper. There's no color, so you're not distracted by all the bells and whistles. You're just looking at the framework and the structure, and you're delivering a message. And there's no confusion. You're showing exactly what you want to say. There's no confusion at all. You know what I mean? There's a time for confusion, and there's a time for like sending people off on a little bit of a tangent where they don't know where they're going. But there's also a time when you want to explain exactly what you want to say. And I think when there's no color involved, you're not being, it's like certain people who try and argue and they don't know what they're saying, or you have an argument, you know exactly what you're saying. It's kind of how I look at it. And I think style is a very good a language for that. You know, either you're hiding something or you're trying to be direct. And to me, no color was always a way to look really direct. And if you can apply color on top of that, then I feel like you have a great balance. But if you can't do one, and you're trying to hide behind color, it's like a b-boy trying to do power moves with no footwork or style. And that's like, I always looked at foundation and strength and structure, and that was always an important thing to me. And it was always geared, you know, always in my blueprint, trying to be at least from my early.
That's really terrific you say that. And I should note to folks who are just jumping in, we're talking with EWOK. He's explaining to us his lettering style, what it represents, especially without color. But you just said something very important about, you know, with the b-boy and tying you back to that, because you were a well-known b-boy back in the day with Skills Method, very famous b-boy crew. Going back, yeah, I'm going to go forward a little bit, but come back, because I found this piece to be very interesting that you did when you talk about color and style. And separating the two, and somehow in this piece, it's a really clever piece. It reminds me of kind of a mistake you would find on a Xerox copier, but yeah. It's interesting because it's in the center, the color is devoid of style, and at the end you see how dynamic style is actually is. What was the inspiration for this? Why do this?
Firstly, I love hearing your interpretation of it, because I had my own thing going into it, but this was just a whim that a lot of people picked up on. And so it's really nice to hear people's feedback, especially coming from you as an artist and the way you would look at it through your lens. That happened as an accident from somebody sending me a video on a different size screen than my phone could register. So as the video played, it could, this is my understanding of it. I feel like the phone could understand the information it was crunching until it got to a point around right after the first letter, and then it just got glitched out, and it was just these horizontal bars of color all the way through. As the video kept playing, it just couldn't catch up to the video feed. So this crazy thing happened, and it's on my Instagram feed. If you go and scroll down a little bit, you'll see it. And I just started immediately like screen grab, screen grab, screen grab, screen grab, screen grab. Like I just wanted to see these horizontal lines. And then I wondered, I was like, man, I wonder if I could paint that. And then the technical side, like, can you paint it without tape? Can you do, what's the limit you could push with the hand? You know, the natural line that you could do? Or do I need to actually start using tools that are not really graffiti, you know, cool? Like, let's be honest, like the piece you see right there, I did it with no tape, but if I really wanted to execute this the way that the glitch looked, I may have to use a wall like 40 feet long and like actually like rulers and tape and shit like that. But it's more of like getting this like look that I've never seen before. And this was just me in a sense, like a beta test, like if I could pull it off. And I do want to revisit this, but it's interesting that the feedback that I got from this was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's worth revisiting. I mean, you've already mastered, if we go back, you know, you've already mastered, you know, traditional style lettering per se, not traditional, your own specific style lettering. And I wanted to come back just to give Omni a shout out, rest in peace. He was a friend of yours, and this was a very nice tribute to him.
Thank you, brother.
And
I tried to put a few of his outlines through my little filter and see what I could come up with.
Yeah, little shout out to Omni, rest in peace. But yeah, I mean, again, one of the things, there's a pattern that's emerging in all of this for me that's very interesting about the work that you're doing in both style writing, but also illustrative techniques and painting techniques that are coming through. And this one in particular, I think one of the things that draws my attention is the kind of smoldering of color that's emerging behind this wall style EWOK, which is really simple in terms of its color pattern, you know, going from yellow, white to some kind of orange. It seems like you spent more time on the clouds or that energy around your piece. It's really quite beautiful.
So that stuff that you're seeing is something that kind of reoccurs in my work. And it really is a homage in my sense to a 90s style that really impacted me in my developmental years, coming from like Emit and Sub and Gaze and Fact and Cause and TD and these guys who were doing like IMOC and DF walls. They always had like these flare and like this smoky, blendy, dark thing happening. And I've tried to carry that torch because kind of a lot of people over the years have like tried to like nip at it, but then they kind of put it down and keep it moving. But it's in my DNA to kind of keep doing that stuff. And it's just a nice little element to like juxtaposing the hard line, heavyweight stuff to like a soft, blendy, smoky kind of thing that has a story and a history to it. So to me, that's like DF IMOC style all day.
Who was it? Tell us some of the members of that crew.
So the guys that I was looking up to was Emit and Sub and Gaze and these characters at the time. They were just in a sense they were coming from their little vacuum up in the northeastern quarter, like Connecticut, Boston, downstate. They were painting a lot of train lines, and by the time they came to the city, they were also painting with a different approach than maybe the city had seen at the time. Even though they were trying to emulate like what they considered to be New York City graffiti, they had their own approach with it. So me coming onto the scene, I was fortunate to like sit and look at these pieces and this is early stuff for me, development, seeing this stuff up close and being able to kind of like analyze like how they're doing this stuff. So this was the stuff that really impacted me, was those guys all day. Like I've said this, I can't say how many times I've said this in interviews and stuff, but those guys were really pivotal to me. And I'm very fortunate to be still carrying the flag for that crew. And I got put down, I think, in 2010. So it was like with IMOC, and it was just like a full circle thing for me, because at the time the crew was kind of a little bit on a downslope, but that crew is come back like so big, and they're still impacting the scene now, and everything from clean trains to fucking global stuff and highways and streets and pieces. And the IMOC crew is definitely like still around. We just had our 30th anniversary last year, and a lot of the guys came out, so I got to meet a lot of the old dudes, and it's been a pleasure being able to kind of still carry that torch in a sense.
One of the testaments to writing culture is longevity of partnerships and crews, that you could speak of your crew, like of having a 30-year anniversary. Uh,
Yeah.
it's pretty intense. Not even the Cubists lasted that long. I want to go on to the next piece, because this is an interesting piece, this opus piece, because
Yeah.
well, first of all, what year was this painted?
I think that was about 4 years ago, maybe. That's more of that's a homage piece to somebody who was an incredible artist, Harvey Fight, who was the founder of Opus 40, which is like this
Yeah, it's
ridiculous
fantastic one.
ridiculous place upstate. You know,
Uh,
people can go back and look up this guy Harvey Fight, but to me, that was more like a homage to an incredible artist and a lifetime achievement of stuff that he's come up with. And I just felt like just doing a little thing that nobody would pick up on, but you know, it's just a way, another word to play with and different letters altogether, like starting with an O. Nobody wants to do that, but I just felt like it would be fun to do. So it actually says Opus 40, which is a homage to Harvey Fight.
well, one of the things I like about this piece in particular, is that, again, we're seeing variations on your illustration skills. Obviously, your graffiti skills are off the chain, but your illustration skills are quite fantastic, because this opus piece, it's really dynamic. I mean, it's really exploding in all directions. There's a lot of movement and color, you know, and that for most folks, it would be hard to make out what it says. But next to it, I mean, you have all these beautiful illustrations, which are a testament to your illustration skills. And again, you know, one of the things that's important as we're going through your work, is that the hard work does pay off for you, because you end up on the cover of the Graffiti New York book by Eric Felisbrett Deal.
Yeah.
And this was huge.
Yeah, that was a big deal, man. I was really humbled by that. Deal's a good dude.
Yeah, he goes back, for those who don't know who Deal is, he's an old original CIA member. Him and Spar, brothers from the Lower East Side, and well respected in the culture. But I point that out because you know, I want to focus on you as the illustrator, because as you start developing and moving, you know, expanding your horizons beyond style writing, you start developing characters, and this was amongst the first characters that you developed. Tell us a little bit about him.
So that's a character called the Horsington. It was kind of like my first introduction to a solo vinyl figure that wasn't painted on a sculpt that somebody else designed. This was like a first standalone piece by me, I guess. Yeah, it kind of came about. It's funny because we talked about the Picasso's Guernica piece, and I never even drew the two together. But yeah, it's
striking, isn't it?
Yeah, and when I realized, I was like, I never even thought about that. But yeah, and that piece was a very political piece at the time, so which kind of is, you know, funny for me because my voice is a little political at times, if you know me. But yeah, this was just the first character at the time, and I was trying to at the time just come up with like iconic little characters that people could remember me by, kind of like a Mickey Mouse's thing or a Coca-Cola logo. I was trying to come up with like these stamps that people would recognize, and this was more of a sticker campaign at the time. Every time I would do a big painting sale for me, I would just spend like, I would take a chunk of it and spend like $1,500 and just get a bunch of stickers made out of LA. And I kind of was one of the first guys, I think, to do like these character full color stickers, like quality screen printed stickers, die cut, and just putting them up everywhere as just a little promotional thing. So there's a couple campaigns of these that came out after that, but that was the beginning.
What did the character represent to you? Why the horse head hat per se? Why having a horse that evokes the kind of anxiety that he does, which again, that's part of the interesting thing to me in correlation to Guernica. You know, that stark anxiety, the fear in that horse's eye.
There's definitely some angst in there, I guess, but it came from me watching a movie, Time Bandits, a movie. You know, I mean, I'm sure you heard of Time Bandits. Yeah. There's a young Sean Connery, and there's a scene where I was just sitting there sketching while I was watching a movie, and there's a scene where he like swings his sword and knocks the head off of this guy, like a warrior. And I remember this head looked all decayed, and it was more like a scary image of like this battle thing. And I ended up drawing like my own version of like this animal head on top of a warrior dude, and that's really what it came from, was from like watching Time Bandits and this like, yeah, I mean that's kind of that's the 3D version that it came out to be, but it just came from me just sketching. I do a lot of drawing while I'm watching movies and stuff like that, and it just kind of, it just stuck out to me at the time. It was pretty odd, and it's just a nice angle to play with.
Yeah, you know, at the museum, I've gotten a lot of questions about this character, the origins of this character. Why would a man wear a horse head? Uh, it's so bizarre, but hey,
Yeah,
you know, he's next to Vampiro. You know, like why would a
yeah.
vampire wear like a Kangol hat, right? But no, it's interesting because this leads you into another figure that's important in in who you are,
Right.
Mr. Brainlington.
Yeah, man.
And so this is really fascinating because I've always wondered what motivated this. What was this character?
That's actually in Wynwood. That's where he was born in Wynwood. My thing at the time for this, I'm kind of locked and loaded with this question because people have asked me this a lot. The street art thing was popping up big at the time, and I was trying to find a way to transition my work into that audience without scaring them away with my lettering, which I still always loved. But I always got more appreciation from the layman or the street dude with these characters. So I was like, well, what's the way I can introduce my artwork to these audience, but still sneak in my wording and my lettering and my name? So the secondary punchline is the name in the brain folds that people kind of don't see at first if you're not really looking into lettering, like graffiti writers and stuff. Always kind of, you analyze things for like letter shapes and stuff, but like the general passerby, or I'm not going to say idiot, but like the general passerby is just going to look at it and see it for what it is. It's like a brain with a grin, and like maybe they'll appreciate that angle, and then maybe later they'll find out that it says my name in the brain. But that was just sort of like a way of sneaking it in the back door, but trying to kick in the front door with a concept of like an iconic character. And again, I'm
Right,
trying to like stamp, like make it as a stamp, you know, and make it like my Coca-Cola logo or whatever. And I kind of step away from these guys, but I do come back to them because people ask for them, and I do love them, and I like to go hard with something and let it marinate and step away, and then let it kind of go on its own for a little while, then revisit it, because people do like when the comeback comes back. So
so it's interesting because you know, in this day and age, it's not uncommon for writers uh, to create their own icon, right?
yeah,
As opposed to the lettering. So like if you see an orange in Miami, you know it's atomic, right?
right.
And things like that. And that's a really interesting phenomenon in terms of getting up with writers. Writers normally, I don't recall writers of my generation being interested in that kind of concept. And
Yeah,
again, you've managed to manifest them as an object. Again, it's really interesting that you were careful to choose something as a result of the time that you were in. Because you're right, at the time you were developing this, the vinyls were hot. You know,
yeah.
that was the game at the time.
And I was happy to be part of it, but I didn't want to like hitch myself to that. Like I saw a lot of artists completely abandon the graph scene to just jump on like this. And I don't want to call it a trend because it's still around, but I don't like to attach myself to things like that where it just seems too predictable. So I like to drop something in a little scene, like maybe a clothing scene or a toy scene or a sneaker scene or whatever, and then kind of move on. Like I like to be a standalone. I don't want to be like, oh, he's the toy guy or he's the sneaker guy, or you know what I mean? Like I never really wanted to be like locked down or predictable in that sense. So I've loved to do the Horsington figure. I did the Brainlington figure, but there's like 10 years in between of those with me leaving that industry where I wasn't really paying attention to who's doing things, and
Right, but
now,
you also did some commercial projects. You've done a ton of commercial work along the way, haven't you?
yeah, I mean, I try to do everything, dude. I'm trying to fill in the blanks, man. I gotta like figure out how this legacy pans out. So I don't really like downtime, but I need to recharge sometimes. So I go hard with certain things, and I need to kind of take a step back and reevaluate how I'm doing things and what's my next plan. Do I want to keep doing the same thing every year, or do I want to try a different angle? And a lot of times you have to step out of your comfort zone and take a few risks. And I may not have always succeeded with those, but I'm always kind of willing to sacrifice something to try something new. And
Right.
I appreciate that, and I always strive for that. And it's something that I look towards to try new things that are a little risky, and not be too predictable. A lot of people want to be like, oh, it's trendy now to draw on maps, and it's like, okay, that's not really it doesn't inspire me to do that shit. Like, I want to do something else. You know what I mean?
I do. And one of the things that, while I understand the motivation to do these kinds of, figures and create your own icons, let's just say, I find the value in your work lies in the line. And
Yeah.
and one of the things I've come to appreciate is the gentleness and the kind of precision in your line. And we were talking about this earlier about your influences, and of course Egon Schiele comes to mind and stuff. But there is something so beautiful in the kind of illustrations that you do. Was this part of the development as you were going to school at Pratt, and who were you looking at in terms of developing your drawing skills and illustration
Yeah.
skills?
So the figure study stuff was always a hard nut to crack early on, because I was very stylistic and caricatures and looking at like cartoons and stuff. But the more I got into like the figure study stuff, I loved it. And like, the better you get, the more you understand like gesture and mood in these things. And so, after you don't need to do it anymore, but when you have options to do it, it's like it's always fun to do it. And a lot of people, I said on the phone earlier, like, love that you picked up on that, because this stuff is kind of overlooked by like the graph people or the letter types, which is, again, this is different muscles for me in the head. Like, I love this stuff. Like, I love doing this, but nobody, not too many, I don't want to say nobody, but like, majority of the people in our world, you and me, like, we would know, don't pick up on this stuff. But to me, this is still purity, and I still love doing it. And I go to these like 12-hour overnight draw-a-thon things where you get through about an hour and a half of like rusty, and then you're just in a flow state till like 9 a.m. And by the time you go back the next day and look at the pages you did over the night, there's like magic happens. And I have my style of drawing with like red and blue, and then outlining with black to emphasize line weight and stuff like that. So these are things that I've year after year kind of tried to crack at, and I don't know where it's going to go. I just love pushing it. And like, stuff like this to me is just, it's beautiful, but like, nobody really knows this stuff. And like I said, it's just a different muscle, man. Like, you can never stop me from doing like the letter styling stuff that I love. But this stuff is just, it reminds me, like, if I sat down with like Mode 2, like how we would talk about this kind of stuff, because I know he has that love for this kind of stuff too. And I
Yeah.
don't really have that many people I can talk to about this kind of stuff that's in our world, if you know what I'm saying. So, it's just another practice that I love to jump into and put my mind in that stuff. And
Well, what I like is that, it exists in your voir, but also more importantly, it crosses over. The line, it does when you get into the caricatures.
Oh, right.
Which is something also, again, while this, again, crosses over into another type of illustration, it still has a great line quality that stems back from those drawings that we were just looking at, in terms of having, the sensitivity of line weight and gesture. And, again, one of the things that you do quite well is in the face, right? You're sensitive to a mood, as you would say.
Yeah.
Any reason why you didn't go into kind of like comic strip illustration, or?
I mean, and I'm going to say this, and it might piss a lot of people off in that industry, but like, I got away from comic books because, for one, I didn't want to do all the in-between pages. I was more interested in like the splash pages or the cover type impacting stuff. But also, like, I came up reading a lot of comics as a kid, and I always felt like the other people and the fans that bought comics, they're kind of like dorks, man. And like, I just didn't want to have like a sea of dorks behind me. Like, I mean, that's me as an adult. It sounds kind of corny, but as a kid, as like a teenage 14-year-old, I was like, I don't want to get in an industry that's just full of nerds. And like now, as an adult, I realized, you know, there's fans of all different types of people. But I've actually come back to comics as a fan, and now I buy a lot of the original art from the people that inspired me back in the day, like Simon Bisley and Bill Sienkiewicz and all these guys. Like, these are people that I've gone back to and tried to track down original artwork because of how important it was to me. And their careers are incredible. So I
Yeah.
almost wish, like, maybe somebody pushed me. I wish somebody pushed me and said, you know what, just stick it out and you'll get a lucrative career in this realm. You know what I mean? But it just wasn't
Look,
something.
you've managed to establish a fantastic career, and again, in terms with the diversity in your work, it would have been kind of a loss, I would imagine, if you would have went into the industry and not
Yeah,
experienced everything you have
yeah.
up to this point.
I mean, I'm not really regretful. I'm happy with the way things are going. You know what I mean? I'm still pushing at what my next thing could be and what's next. But, you know, you always want what you can't have. So I love
Sure,
all this.
but the thing is, like, what AWOK, one of the things that I really appreciate is that you're starting to bring in this illustration style, and although this is 2012,
Yeah,
you're bringing this style to the public, right? It's quite interesting because, again, it is at times, you know, how would I say, um, super aggressive in the way that graffiti is,
absolutely. That was a
but
perfect vehicle to do this stuff, right?
mhm. And so tell me about bringing characters to the street as opposed to lettering styles.
There's a time and place for everything, man. And I realize people appreciate sometimes like this image above, just going crazy with just a bunch of overload of characters and just the thing about graffiti, and it's losing its energy these days because everyone's so used to it, especially in certain neighborhoods now. But it was a time when it was so impacting, man. It was so powerful, a tool to like just be heard. And I mean, it's so powerful to the point where you're seeing all these like quote unquote studio artists who now want to just try and bring a projector out and try their hand at like a mural because they know the power that it has on the street. But I feel like a lot of that stuff's diluting it, and they're almost breaking down the impact it used to have because there's just so much and everyone's lost in the sauce, and like people don't realize like the whole thing about purity and who deserves the credit. It's like that used to be a little more easy to figure out. Now it's just so convoluted with like studio artists and like people who are using projectors and like, you know,
Right.
it's
I
almost
mean,
like anybody could do it now almost. You know what I mean?
could your opinion be formed by the analog experience you came up with? I mean, clearly illustrated by one of your paintings and one of your illustrations on this screen.
I mean, I just like the fact that there was decades where you just went with a sketch and started painting. You know what I mean? And I know things change and you kind of have to roll with the times, and I'm all down for new technologies and stuff like that. I just feel like I came up, I think Wayne told me once, he's like, dude, if you stand in line long enough, you'll get to the front of the line. And if someone gets out of line ahead of you because they couldn't hang, you move up in line. And I felt like that was a way I looked at the world. And I mean, maybe this is naive, but like something happened where all of a sudden people were kind of cutting in line and they weren't paying the dues that like the people that I'm standing in line with were paying. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's people who paid way more
Sure.
dues. I'm not sitting here saying I'm the fucking be all for that, but I kind of understand how things worked. And like when I started to see like all these studio artists that were, I mean, let's be honest, like I would have got robbed painting in the 80s, but these guys would have got robbed painting in the 90s. You know what I mean? So like there's a certain pecking order that got kind of fucked up when I started seeing a lot of like these corporate commercial walls come out with like, you know, like an iced tea company would hire some artist to do a graffiti wall, and then all of a sudden my wall in Wynwood is, I can't paint it when I come down, and because it's like somebody just threw 10 grand at like a restaurant owner to put like an iced tea like logo on their wall to graffiti. So it got a little weird for me, man. And things are still happening, but you got to roll with the punches and figure out a way to survive. And it's a rat race, and a lot of people are in it, but I don't know. We could talk about
But
this for
again,
all night.
you are distinctively standing out because of this illustration style that you bring to the table, the painting style, and also, you know, if it's not in this in on the streets, you're bringing it to the studio, which is important, right, for your practice. All these things that you're learning are kind of taking shape on your canvases, which are like this one. You know, there's this collage of a variety of things, from Domino sugar labels to uh, cash for cars and parking stubs, um, and and so tell me about this painting, because you have a character that's holding up a big fat carrot, and people with cell phones uh,
Yeah.
taking photos of him, which kind of, you know, kind of maybe relates to what you were just saying, you know.
Um, the origin of this came from some guy in England holding up some like contest carrot, and I thought it was just like the craziest old man with this giant like root in his hand, and then all these people taking pictures of it, and I've always gravitated towards like old people with features and like character, and then trying to like redraw them. So this really just came from some crazy gardener farmer guy, and then just my take on the moment in time when this picture was taken, that clearly in whatever world this guy is, he's like the man. And this probably doesn't even look like him in the end result, but you know, that's just my, again, I like to try to do odd shit. Like, I don't want people to look at it and be like, oh, that's a woman sitting on a bed and he painted it. Like, I want people to be like, what the fuck was this guy thinking? Why did he pick this? And like all the little elements that are in it. And I try to put things in it that people can see like 20 years from now. When if you buy a painting of mine and you have it, there's little gifts that you're gonna find like years from now. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like
I
all this
find it
little,
really interesting in these collages that you'll have, you know, a letter from Ohio, and you know, some label from
yeah.
London, uh, and things from around the world. Where are you picking up these artifacts?
A lot of it started here in New York, like these parking lot stubs and stuff like that. But then I would travel around and bring back money and like stamps and antique. I'd go to like antique stores and try and pull old stuff and bring back. And it just became like a stockpile of things to pull from. And the collage element was something that I just tried to do backgrounds, and it was my way of trying to step into a fine art world, but then sneak in my love of like graffiti. And I feel like a lot of times you're pigeonholed. So I was trying to find an angle that the fine art world could appreciate, but then without them knowing, or maybe reluctantly, I'm sticking in my stuff that I'm bringing with me who I am, but I'm getting my foot in the door with something that maybe they like. But over the years, I ended up falling in love with the collage stuff, and the collage stuff has gone in its own direction. And again, I love this stuff, and I don't know, it's just something that I've always really gravitated towards, and like the Tetris element of like making everything fit seamlessly and no gaps in between. And I don't know, it's just something that I've fallen in love with.
Yeah,
And
and
that one,
it's a pattern you repeated on this piece for the wet paint show at the museum. Uh,
yeah.
these tickets. Tell me about the tickets with the numbers. Where are you
The numbers are just
procuring
these
them?
industrial stamps that I just would see around the city, and I didn't know what they were for a bunch of years. I'd just pick them up, put them in my pocket, and then put them in a pile. And then, you know, years later, I found out it was a company, and I ended up going to the company and getting like boxes of them. So I have like thousands just to have for myself. And but there's an element of like picking shit up off the street. I don't know, it sounds kind of crazy, but like if you want to talk about street art, that shit is like straight up off the street. Like I'm picking up certain things that I see, like handwritten notes and like, you know, letters, and trying to find old vintage stuff. And it became its own little thing where I would hunt things down or go to antique shops in other countries, or, you know, or go in abandoned buildings and find piles of stuff, and I don't know, music notes and money from other countries and stuff like that. I mean, it's all little elements, and they all kind of feel like a self-portrait, even though it's not a portrait of a person. It's all stuff that I gravitate towards for one reason or another. It's not just
Yeah,
grabbing a bunch of stuff and making wallpaper. Like, it all has purpose for me. You know what I mean? And that's the difference between other people who do collage. They're just trying to fill a background. I'm trying to use pieces that kind of mean something to me.
well, you're not bound just to collages, because this is a recent
Yeah.
work. You told me you are doing a large scale uh, painting And this one, it seems like a figure that has two faces and is probably haunted by this Kermit that's yielding a I forget what you call that particular farming instrument,
A
but it's like
sickle.
a sickle, yes. And he's
The symbol
drinking.
of death. It's a Grim Reaper symbol of death, basically. There's a death
Yes.
mark. That's not
So
on
tell
it.
me about this painting, because it's a distortion of your view of the subject, and in kind of a spherical way. What's inspiring this series of works?
This particular piece was kind of like, again, going with the times and like trying to use a fine art angle to make fun of the digital meme stuff that's going on right now. So like Kermit sips tea and Pedro the monkey, like these are just like literally internet memes that I'm trying to bring into like a fine art world and like force it into a painting. And this is stuff that we all laugh at, but like, has anyone taken it and made it like kind of important? And it's a sign of times, man. Like I always look back at things that I do and I look at it like, what's it going to be looked at like 40 years from now? Are we going to be like, oh, I remember that era when there was the Kermit sips tea thing was like the thing, and no one ever took it to like a fine art world and made it important, like forced important by way of painting it on something. So like
So
it's just
are
me
you
just testing
feeling?
the waters, just testing the waters.
Yeah, are you feeling that the kind of illustrative uh, paintings take a backseat to either, these realistic paintings or these abstract expressionistic paintings? Do you feel like is there room for something like this?
Yeah, man, this is like you're making your own lane, and I feel like a lot of years graffiti artists were trying to fit into their world, and there's gatekeepers for that stuff, man. And I'm sure you know this more than I do in certain things. They only let a few people in, man, and like you're not gonna play. They're not gonna. I can't. I mean, dude, we could spend a whole nother hour on this stuff, dude. And I find that it might be harder to find your own lane, but I feel like in the long run, it's more ironclad, and you're not really. I mean, you're not really like at the mercy of somebody else like locking you out or like the next flavor of the month coming and taking your place kind of thing. And I feel like especially in the New York scene, I mean, they only let in a few people, man, and the people that they do let in, who the hell knows why? Some of them. But you're either down by law or there's a whole line of people waiting to see if they can get into the party. And like, I'm more on the thing where I'm like, I'll be over here making my party. I don't know if I want to kiss ass to the bouncer to get into the party. Like, I've tried that route. It doesn't feel good to me to brown nose. And I know a lot of people make careers out of that stuff. And I just would rather the work speak for itself. And if I have to wait 40 years for it to be appreciated, I'm willing to do that shit, man.
Right. I think there's going to be a redefinition as to how we are going to be valuing art and people's legacies, and all that stuff is up for reevaluation at the moment
Yeah,
due to
man.
Corona.
Yeah.
But I think also it's allowing people to go to work in the studio and keep focused on your work. Your work in particular sometimes, like I mentioned before, can be satirical, but also carries a lot of weight and newsworthy commentary. This one in particular, the portrait of someone, and it says, "I cured cancer, and a hitman killed me a week later in Florida," and that was a true story, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was about 40 of those that happened that year in Florida. So I'm not trying to put on my tinfoil hat and be a conspiracy nut, but there's some big industry trying to stifle, these holistic advances in the industrial medical complex of curing things. And if they don't want it to happen right now, they're going to shut it down quick. And so let's just say there's somebody in Florida probably going around, like how we got a Cento that sneaks around at night and does pieces and everybody wonders how he did it. There's probably an ex-hitman who's being paid to fucking take dudes out in Florida right now. The Cento of hitmen, probably. Who knows? But yeah, that's a good story, man. And if you look into it, there's a lot more than just that one guy. But that was one of the articles that I read. And if you go down that rabbit hole, man, it gets pretty dark.
So do you feel if you take those risks, do you feel that may cause isolation for you in the business of art?
Oh yeah, absolutely, dude. I mean, it isolates you until it becomes the guy who's saying it and no one else says it, and then everybody loves that stuff. So, what are you gonna do, dude? I mean, I'm surrounded by people who bite their tongue about politics right now, and I might be the bad guy for saying a lot of the stuff I say, but I was raised by fucking hippies, dude. My parents were like 60 protesters, man. It's just in my DNA to like talk about what's going on. So it's just part of me. I've had to like narrow down my feed a little bit and keep the politics to like my story, because it was kind of taking over my actual posts. But you know, I'm a little outspoken and sometimes
I feel as you should be. As I think particularly the talent you have is a perfect channel for these political views. I mean, they're really quite good. They really are part of our time. It's definitely art of our time right now. I would certainly encourage you to keep exploring that anger, that rage. There's something to be said about responding to this moment we're currently in.
Yeah, for sure, man.
And you've really risen up to the challenge, going directly at the president.
Yeah.
Do you feel that this is working out for you? Is it alienating you? Is it something that?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably done a lot for the people who believe similar to things I believe, and it's probably pushed a lot of people away. But I think, like, I don't know, I think Nas made an album where he was like, I'm trying to shake off the commercial people. Like, to me, that's like, the people who subscribe to my wavelength and frequency, they know what I'm about, dude. I'm genuine with what I believe in, and if you're into that stuff, you're going to gravitate to it like organically. I'm not out here trying to play the fence on both sides. Like, either you're with it or you're not, and you know, no hard feelings, man. But we're from New York, bro. Like, we've known Trump as a fucking scam for decades. The rest of the country, they're just not up to par yet. They don't know it. Like, he's a hustler, man. And if you're falling for that snake oil shit, you're late to the party, man. New Yorkers have known about this guy since the 70s.
And how do you feel about that? About, you know, being an apolitical artist?
I love it. I feel like it's especially, you know, being anonymous, dude. I don't have nothing to worry about, man.
Because it's hard, you know. Sometimes I wonder at myself as an artist, you know, how do you extend yourself out into, you know, addressing the rage one feels in this time. I certainly don't have the kind of illustrative skills you do, but I think there's a place for it. There's a necessity for it. And that's why when I saw your illustrations that I'd never seen before, I was quite excited. I was like, wow, these are very accomplished and really forceful illustrations.
They started as a joke, man. It kind of just went on its way. I bought a domain, iblametrump.com, and I was just selling like drawings for a while because people were like, you got to sell these. So it was just a little hobby. I just threw up like, I think 12 drawings that flipped and sold. I got the domain. I mean, I got so bored of drawing the guy. Like, every week it was just something else. But again, I like to draw things in the moment so we can all look back at it. You know, it could be like Kim Jong-un or anything, just anything that's happening that justifies a one image punchline for me. It's just fun to do.
So we're winding down. So I want to ask folks out there, I want to first thank them for joining us. And I also want to encourage them to ask you questions. If you have any questions for EWOK, please let us read them out so we can get some answers.
Yeah, man. In the meantime, man, thank you for doing the homework and looking into the stuff, and the museum and Ket and Noah. You guys are all killing it, man. I think it's something that's really important right now, you know. So I'm happy to be involved. I hope I can be involved more.
Yeah, you know. Absolutely. Somebody asked, I need to know how the spiral comes into the work. Is it based on the golden spiral?
I don't know who said that, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's design elements behind my stuff. It's not necessarily the golden ratio, but yeah, there's design elements as a blueprint under my work. But yeah, a lot of times that's I like to hide stuff in there. Yeah, so, very aware of design element for sure.
Okay, Noodle Snap asks, what is your view on New York City the graph scene today compared to the 90s?
I subscribe to a certain look of writers that are still, to me, look like 90s writers. That's the only stuff I really appreciate, man. Like, you know, the tags and throw-ups that look like 90s writers, dude, like Scuff and Nems and these guys, and rest in peace Kez and J.A. And these are the dudes that I respect and look up to, because to me it still feels like the 90s. And the 90s is Big Note and Giz and these guys. These are dudes that are '90s writers that I looked up to. So to me, I look at that stuff, like nice hand styles from boroughs like Brooklyn and Bronx and stuff like. These are the things that still inspire me as far as street graffiti in New York, and you know, it's always something that I'm always going to look at and love. But
Cool.
you know,
So,
there's an element of stuff that I'm not into too, but it's heavy. But I definitely
gotcha.
look at this like
So
90s.
Furby Cakes ask, will there be more Gimme projects in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Gimme Project is kind of on the low right now. We're about to make a big comeback, and then COVID hit, so there's a little pause on that. But yeah, it's coming back big time.
Cool.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Actually, it's a good question from
90s.
Tree Home. He asks, writers from upstate central New York, you looked up to back in the day.
There wasn't any before us. There wasn't. I didn't know any of them. I'm not sure if that's what he's asking, but yeah, like I said, we created out of a vacuum, dude. There wasn't anything to look at till I went out to Danbury and saw pieces up close. The first stuff I saw was in Danbury. Emit and Wink and Jive.
So we got about a minute, and All Natural asks, do you think it's important for writers to be more aware of the other elements of hip hop?
More aware of what?
The other elements in hip hop.
I mean, whatever you gravitate towards, man. If that's what you like. Like I was into b-boying. I respected MCing and DJing, but it wasn't really anything that I felt pulled me to it. But like, it depends, man. If you want to be a purist, you're gonna be obsessive about certain things. But you know, if it's not organic, man, don't force that shit. Like, do what you like, man. Yeah, I mean, I love the history of it. Don't get me wrong, but there's people who love, you know, the DJ element of it and stuff that I never could follow. Like some of these guys, but you know.
Right. Well, EWOK, I want to thank you for spending the hour with us and truly enlightening us with your work and your views and your beautiful skills, man. I'm so excited for you. I look forward to what comes next from you.
Thank you, man.
And of course, we here at the Museum of Graffiti, you know, appreciate you and support you. And we look forward, once this quarantine is beyond us, that we see you in New York. I mean, in Florida, rather, or I see you in New York at some point. But yeah, so thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the love. Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody tuning in, man, for real.
Yeah, and again, folks, check out EWOK's Instagram. Give him a shout out. You know, let him know what you think of his work. And also, you know, like I said before, make time to visit us at museumofgraffiti.com. Tomorrow we'll be joined by Henry Chalfont. So that should be a fun interview to talk to him. And again, until tomorrow, folks, rest easy, be in peace, be safe, take care of yourself, and wear your mask. Get one from EWOK. Are those for sale?